So take us into the conversation about branding, because I think this is probably where you really shine, because you have a background in marketing, you have a background in art, you know, like I feel like branding is very intuitive to you, and you've pointed out in previous interviews you've done that branding was a big part of your success. So what does a strong brand need?
Well, I guess in addition to having kind of a clear point of view and, you know, clear brand attributes that are appealing to people, it's, you know, there's sort of an emotional resonance that you want to try and develop.
How do
with
you
your
do
guest. I don't. You're already gonna. This question is above my head, but
is it intuitive for you?
No, I don't know. You know, I think some of that comes through. I mean, we're fortunate in the restaurant industry to like have the opportunity to have a lot of like personal touch points or whatever. And so I think, you know, I mean, I think that's really valuable in deepening the emotional brand connection to people, is just like those, you know, the expression of the brand through customer service.
Okay. So living your brand, not just saying
Totally.
you're something, but like putting on paper, like who are we? And then how do we, starting with the end in mind, who do we want to be? And
Yep.
how do we show up every day to be that?
Totally.
So what do you do to do that?
Well, so for us, for example, I guess one example of that is, you know, from very early on, and with the truck, I mean, it was less surprising as a truck, but it still stands to this day. We sort of like, you know, one of the things that was important to our brand was just people expressing their individuality, right? And we felt that Mexicue kind of represented that, and creatively expressing your individuality. And so, you know, we've had some fun gear in the past, but we've never had anyone in uniforms. And still to this day, it's a conversation we've had because sometimes it causes confusion in the restaurants now, with like people trying to find their server.
Yeah.
Exactly. But, you know, I think that's one example, is just having people that, you know, the team just, you know, able to be themselves in that way.
Yeah. I think there was a really like a point where like that's the thing, like you hear from all over the place, like, oh, like a good brand is a solid uniform. A good brand is like all these things. Like when you communicate with your clean in like, I don't know. There's just so much different advice all over the place. And I think it all depends on like what you're going for. Like what's the end game, which is why you need to start with the end in mind. Who are we? What do we want to be? And reverse engineer that.
Right.
But yeah. So back to branding. What were you doing unique with your brand? How were you communicating your brand to the public?
Well, at the time when we started the business, it was actually like, if you can believe it, like not early days in social media, but it was sort of a new phenomenon. I mean, it certainly wasn't early days in social media, but I mean, compared to like, you know, we didn't have, you know, I mean, this was 2010. So 10 years ago, only 10 years ago yet, like Instagram was, if it even existed, it was not a thing. And
today,
Twitter was like kind of, you know, was a bigger social media platform at the time. And so we definitely like jumped onto that, and we were using that as like looking to model, you know, Koji and some of the other like really cool trucks out of LA that were leaders, not only in the food world, but also doing some of those innovative things in social. And so we just sort of latched onto that very early on as a fun way to talk about who we are, A, and B, engage with, you know, the guest, the customer.
So, I mean, I think what's important is what you're communicating, not necessarily the tools you're using to communicate, because that's changed for today. But get more into what you were communicating. Like, give me an example of what your Twitter feed would have looked like, say, 24 hours leading into an event.
Totally. I think what we were probably, you know, one of the things that's like core to the brand is just that we're taking like kind of creatively taking things and combining them in unexpected, fun, creative ways. I mean, that's sort of like, you know, kind of the origin of the culinary. And, you know, that we're not, you know, that we're not a traditional, authentic Mexican restaurant, which is probably where people like put us without knowing much more about the brand.
Yeah.
So we worked hard to like make sure we were expressing that. And so, you know, a lot of it was about expressing, you know, kind of trying to convey, you know, that quality of the food in the brand. And then we did a lot of like, you know, we talked about music, we did fashion events, we did music events, we talked about music. We, you know, we, as I said, we were always trying to do like kind of fun, cool gear and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think that was the type of content that we were focusing on early on.
So what I'm hearing from you early on, you're sharing your vision.
Yep.
And I think that's not what people do well enough. They make a brand and say, this is what we're going to do, but they don't really communicate what the vision is, because you weren't your traditional Mexican restaurant.
Right.
You, in a way, where you kind of invented your own kind of cuisine. You combined, you did like a hybrid or fusion of barbecue and southern barbecue and Mexican food. Right. And so when communicating, if you're trying to do something new, or when you're sharing your vision, is there any specific advice on what translates well when sharing vision?
I mean, this is going to sound cheesy or generic or whatever, but I think just, authenticity is such an overused word, but I think it's just, just being authentic.
Yeah. And I think that ties into the next thing I was going to point out, is that you weren't just talking about the food. You're talking about what you also like, what the brand likes, like the music, the events, and other stuff like that.
Totally. And I think one of the things that
that's
yeah,
authenticity.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not just a restaurant. We're not just a restaurant.
Exactly.
We also like all this other stuff.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
Is authentically us.
Yes. And one of the things that just reminded me of that I just failed to mention earlier is one of the things we still work on today, and early on was really important as well. I think it's important for all brands, is just making sure that people that guests and consumers or whatever understand the people behind the brand. And so that was especially as we're living in a digital world, it's becoming increasingly important to make sure people understand there are people behind the brand.
Yeah.
And that adds authenticity, I think, which is critical and
so would you spotlight employees or chefs?
Yeah, I mean, we did. We spotlighted employees. We definitely spotlighted. Lit up
put
those
a light
employees.
On. Yeah.
Yep. Put a light on those employees, and that was easier to do in some cases than others. It's something we still talk about today. It's like, well, how do we this? Carmelo, who's on the line right now at Nomad, where we are, is such a rock star. He's so awesome. How do we put a spotlight on Melo more often?
I literally just had an idea, and I know this is your story, but just people doing Instagram takeovers, right? Why not let one of your employees do a takeover of your Instagram account?
Yep, it's a great idea. I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but it's just all these things require resources to actually execute it and get it done the right way.